So we have two items on the agenda today. The first one is to give an update about 0.8 Code Orange. You want to start?
Go for it.
No. Okay. So as of today, we still have a few open issues on 0.8, and the plan is to close out as many as possible and cut the release candidate sometime this week, so that we can start a more wide community-wide testing to find more issues on this release candidate. Okay. Do you want to give an estimate of the date, or?
Because all the mixer tests are passing, right? I wonder, Costin, do you know?
They should be passing, yes. I think the fix went in.
I think Martin has one more fix that he wanted to merge.
Yeah.
But there was still one test failure and the PR did not merge.
But even if there is one or two bugs, testing can still proceed with the other features.
It can, so that's the question, right? Given the pending bugs, and including, I don't know what it is that Martin is still working on. Is he on the call?
I think he's out of office today.
Okay. Is there a reason why we cannot start the testing given this set of open bugs?
I would add another open bug there that I found over the weekend, which is, ports in Kubernetes are messed up and don't work. There was a regression. So that one definitely needs to go in. I have a fix, but so probably when do you plan to cut the build, tomorrow or today?
So that needs to go into 0.8 for sure, but do we need to wait for that fix before we cut the release candidate for people testing?
Yes.
We should.
One of the bug fixes on Friday or Thursday,
okay.
The regression, and we need to get it in.
Okay. And when do you expect to
I
get
have
it
it ready.
in?
It's approved. I just need to pass the test and get it in. So
okay.
Later today will be fine too.
So we can cut the release later today.
But either ways, yeah, let's add that to the list, one.
And maybe you can take a look at Martin's PR as well, because I believe you already approved it. Just take a look at the test failure and see if those are really related to the code change.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a different meeting, by the way, today to talk about 0.8. It got moved from 7 o'clock because of the conflict to 1 p.m. So in case any of you are interested in discussing more about this, please show up to the other meeting. But for now, I think, yeah, the plan should be to, after Costin's PR goes out, so maybe we can cut the release tomorrow, in which case I'll send an email out to Istio Dev today. And let's plan on having the community testing either on Wednesday or Thursday. Do any of you have any preference? Are you waiting on any other PRs or anything else to happen?
Why not both? Wednesday and Thursday.
No, of course not. We can kick it off on Wednesday, but I'm trying to figure out if there are any other pending PRs that we want to take into consideration. Okay, guessing the answer is no. Okay, so yeah, Wednesday and Thursday. Of those 2 days, we should pick one day where the core team, they want to be on I don't know, GVC for 5 to 6 hours. So I'll set something like that. That's it.
Cool. Thanks. And then the second topic today is the new test framework. This is part of the SWAT team effort, and Oz has written a doc about the new testing framework. Oz? Is it on?
Oh, hey folks. So I sent the document out to a few folks on Friday. I think some people had a chance to look at it. Yeah, so as part of the SWAT team effort, we started building up a new test framework, and we are actually in kind of the design / like some strong prototyping stage right now. And I just want to garner some early feedback especially on the UX side at this point and how things hold together, so that we can incorporate it into our work. So I'm just gonna try to Andy, do you mind if I hijack?
Oh, go ahead.
All right. Okay, so the basic idea is to come up with a test framework that is, some of the problems are outlined here. So the main problems are, now we have multiple test frameworks, and we are exposing some of the primitives too much to, so that when we are writing tests, the authors are need to deal with things like flakiness and do one-off things. Running these tests locally are not simple, and most people are just opting to use the CI pipeline. We want to kind of simplify that, and all of us use different types of development environments locally. Like I use Mac, for example, and running those tests locally is a problem that we want to attack. And one of the things that we want to also do is like try to let people write their tests in a somewhat higher level, so that we can get this logic of code and actually use it in against different environments, right? So if you want to support different types of environments, we should be able to leverage our existing set of tests. So those are the kind of problems that we are trying to solve with this approach. And you can find some of the details here. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to go over the document after the comments, so there's some interesting comments in here. So this document focuses mainly on the authoring model, and you can actually see the showcase code here checked into GitHub, right? So there's a bunch of different types of showcase code. There's also the actual framework code that we currently have, in case you guys are interested, if you want to kind of peek under the hood. But the idea is the test framework should be straightforward. It should have kind of give you guide rails, so that you kind of do the right thing. It should be easy to use, right? So that's one of the main things that we are shooting for. So opting into the framework itself is relatively easy. We just need to capture test main, and with that we tap into the Go test framework, Go test infrastructure. This is very similar to what the current framework does today. We are pretty much doing the same thing. It's just that it's now a one-liner, and we are off to the races. So some of the things that we did with this is like when we capture the main, we can, for example, expose our own logging attributes. So when I say Go test, I actually see these attributes that you see here. These are directly coming from our framework, right? So if, for example, if I run mixer inline, I can actually specify Go test dash log output level attributes colon debug. I can actually see the mixer attributes coming in during the debug output. So it gives us a kind of some interesting facilities when we capture that test main. There's also other ways where we can specify environments. We can actually say run these tests locally or against a cluster. So this is kind of a grab bag list of things that we have attacked, some UX issues. So the very first one is we actually experimented with labeling the tests. So this is one mechanism that we tried. And Andy's currently working on test categorization problem. So this is kind of a showcase of what we can do in this space, right? And the idea is we can tag the test by specifying some labels. Like this, for example, tags the test using the networking label. And if you look at here in this screenshot, I can actually filter tests out by saying only run networking tests, and you'll see that the tests that don't have the label get filtered out, right? Again, this is just as a way to showcase what we can do, and not it's not a strongly opinionated thing at this point. So by the way, feel free to give feedback at any point, and we can have a discussion about these things, right? So the other thing that we did was essentially a similar mechanism. We can actually let the test author specify the requirements on the environment. So you can say, I have a test method, and it requires the fake apps and a pilot, right? So we expect the framework to be able to make sure that your environment either complies with this, or it can actually make the environment work this way. It can actually modify the environment so that by the time the test starts executing, the environment is as expected. So right now, the design of this is a bit nebulous in the sense that, yes, we actually have the top-level coding pieces for this. Right? We can actually specify dependencies, and we can actually kind of check for them. But the underlying engine, we are still working on this, right? But we expect the experience to look like this.
Okay. So, can you control how pilot will be started? I mean, process, out of process, Docker environment or whatever.
So this we don't want to let the user have too much control on how those things get started, because we want to actually let the user focus more on the actual scenario testing. So, for example, in the local case, we expect the framework to start the pilot for you, right?
Okay, that's okay.
Okay. So this was essentially based describing your requirements on the environment, and then the actual authoring of the test starts with accessing a facade that we have called environment, right? So you essentially say, I want to get a hold of the environment, and from there you actually start writing your test logic. And this is one way to, this is how you normally go. You actually say, okay, I want to get the environment, then I actually want to apply my configuration to the environment for the scenario that I'm interested in. And the environment is going to make sure the right thing happens, quote unquote. For example, if this is a cluster-based test, we are going to just do kubectl on this configuration. Or if it is a local test, we may actually put these in different folders as files, so that pilot can mixer them, then pick them up directly through the file system.
So quick question, for the environment test, can I also specify, like, this is my kube configuration file, and then you would run the test with that particular kube config? Because I'm asking because last week we had to fix a couple of issues regarding not being able to read the configuration file correctly.
So right now, I don't think we actually have a concrete design on this. Like in the current code, you can actually specify the kubeconfig file on the command line. I say go test, and I can say -config and give a kubeconfig file, and that cluster will be used, right? And I at least personally want the experience to be as simple as that, where you want to kind of interject and do these kinds of things. But at the same time, you want these tests to be a bit hermetic. And we may actually opt to say, look, we are just going to depend on a local VM that we start, or local testing environment, to which we are going to actually apply things. And that we don't need to specify the configuration, right? The test will run directly against that environment. Does that make sense?
So there's going to be a default environment that's likely point to the VM, the vagrant VM.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there may not be a way to customize it.
Ideally, I like to have a way to customize so that you can actually take a test, and then if you kind of created like a cluster setting that represents a particular problem, and you just want to run the test against this, I think it's a very valid testing scenario, and we should be able to support.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that's really what I was asking for. Thank you.
Okay, so this is a kind of a straw man model of authoring the test. So once you configure the environment, you can say, like, this is a full test, by the way, just to give you some background. So the idea is you're going to have a pilot and a mixer, and then we are going to do call from one service to the other one and see if you're going to be able to do a check fail, like, do a check, get a failure response or deny response, and then get something logged, right? So this is kind of the scenario in this stroma, right? So the first thing we do is we get a handle to a fake policy backend that mixer talks to. This is like one of the mocks that's going to happen, like we are going to have in the system, where you can directly change the behavior of this backend, and through that you actually change the behavior of Mixer. Here we are saying, okay, from here on, deny all the check requests coming your way. This part shows we are going to get 2 applications, fake applications, handles to those applications that are deployed. This is this is already something that the pilot tests have. And then we are going to make a call from one to the other one. And at the end, we actually expect the results to fail because of the deny check. And then we also expect a report to be done, in a particular way, right? So this kind of showcases how that works.
So when pilot on Mixer has API changes, the mock would also needs to be modified, I guess, by the developer who triggered the API change.
Yeah. So just to be clear, though, these are actually using very high-level primitives. The backend, the policy backend, is using an already established interface we have in Mixer, right? So Mixer is a Mixer adapter is expected to conform to a particular API. And this is going to be implementing that. If that API changes, yes, these mock change, right?
Okay.
Right. Similarly, it should be possible to kind of go to the next level of details. You can actually get a handle to Mixer or pilots directly, which would give you the host or port information, and then you can dial and try to make changes directly, or try to write your tests directly. But the ideal case would be this one, the top one, so that we can actually capture the scenario itself and maybe run it against multiple different environments. So we have a few discussions among us about how to deal with certain things like flakiness. I think being able to control some of the actors, the application, like the apps, the fake apps, ourselves is going to be a big gain in making sure that we can reduce flakiness in the system. Also, we are trying to expose higher level primitives to the user when writing their tests, so that most of the flakiness related stuff should actually be dealt at the framework level. So this should reduce the one-off flakiness issues that's occurring in different tests. Also, I don't know whether some of you guys have seen it. On Friday, I showed a way to expose the config state of pilot, for example, through Control-Z. And we can use that mechanism or similar mechanisms to actually listen to the state changes on the on our components, so that we can ensure that whatever configuration we passed is actually disseminated correctly before going forward with the next steps of the test, instead of just depending on sleeps. So in case you missed that, this is some of the screenshots of that. There's a if you enable Control-Z on a component, it essentially exposes an HTTP endpoint, and through that endpoint, we can expose the various meta information about the component. And in this one, we're exposing the pilot's view of what configuration looks like. And that's pretty much it.
I have some questions about the configuration model. So if you scrolled up a little bit, Oz.
Mm-hmm. That more?
Yeah. So the environment.configure. So the configuration depends on the test requirements, right? Say if you test require pilot and Mixer, you want to configure both of them, or how?
So it's a bit hard to come up with a model that allows you to constrain the configuration based on the requirements, right? So that's why requires is more like a way to say to the system, here, I'm going to be depending on these things in the rest of the code. So either do a precondition check and then show the user that, look, we need these things. Your environment is not set up correctly. So here's a way to fix it. So we are actually kind of letting the user know how to fix their environment so that they can run the test. Or we can try to update the environment so that, okay, these test leads have these requirements. If it's a local test, for example, you have dependency on pilot. Let me go and start a pilot instance, for example, right? Which is kind of divorced from the, okay, let's push the configuration to them. I mean, we can try to be more opinionated and have a strongly type thing around like this information, but I'm a bit skeptical that that will actually work. So that's why they are like separate things.
Okay, so maybe I'm a little bit confused now. So what determines which components to be started in the environment? The requirements or the configuration?
Requirements. The configuration is just for actually sending configuration to these components.
Okay.
You can think of dependencies as either a precondition check or deployment of like Istio YAML, and this being a kubectl of doing, okay, these are the configurations that I want.
I see. And the other question I have is that, so the environment, after it is configured, can it be reused across different tests? Meaning, can I configure the environment in test main and just reuse the same environment across different tests?
We could do that. So so for example, here it shows you can actually specify requires at the suite level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So most likely, what's going to happen is we are going to have one single environment set up, and either we are going to change it only slightly based on each test, or like if you have something like this, it's going to be set up once, and things should just work.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to get at is the scope of the environment. Like, whether different tests have different scope, or the same scope will just be reused.
Well, what do you mean by scope?
Like, do we initialize a new environment for different tests, or we just reuse the same environments across different tests?
To me, that's kind of like a caching problem, right? So if we can actually reuse the environments and still be able to preserve the consistency of the test, we should definitely do that.
Like, if some tests actually mess up the environment, then which can cause problems to other tests, right? So, like, do you want to guarantee the statefulness of the environment across different tests?
So you can actually, I actually have modeled this in an earlier one. You can actually say something like exclusive. So if you should be able to specify that, look, I'm going to be need to have exclusive access to this, and which will be a signal to the test framework that says, okay, once this guy is done, I should try to restore the environment back to its original condition.
I see. Cool.
Okay. Everybody seems to be speechless. So
yeah, can I ask a quick question? I assume you have looked at how Kubernetes does their test framework. Have you compared with them, and hopefully this is a little bit more ahead of them, or maybe what they are using?
I looked at their test frameworks a bit some time ago. They had a lot of mock-based tests last time I saw it. And actually, at some point, I tried to incorporate some of these things, not related to this, but in general for other work. Yeah, but I haven't looked at the actual, like, the full-blown integration test frameworks that, like, the setups they have. But they seem to have a lot of mock-based testing.
Which is kind of what we are proposing here too, unless I'm misunderstanding it, right? Like the API for pilots, it's kind of like a mock implementation for pilot or mixer API.
No, they're not mocks for these APIs. These are, you can think of them as handles to already running instance, right? So when I say get mixer, I'm not actually getting a new like mock mixer. It's just that there's a mixer running. I am getting metadata about that mixer instance. So, for example, I can connect to its gRPC. So the things that are being mocked at are at the edges of the system. Like the applications are mocked, so they are mocking real applications, or they are like the policy backend is mocked, which is at the edge. they're not part of Istio core.
Okay, so
think-
your interaction with like a Cube API is marked, but the pilot makes the core Istio components are not.
I don't think it's even, I mean, I think the intent, or if I understand it correctly, is that you are going to interact with the current components, the real Kubernetes server, real pilot, real mixer. And depending on how you run the test, you may end up with a local pilot, you may run with a real pilot running in JKE, or you may run, I mean, it's when you run the test, you decide against which components you run them, but all calls go to, a real component.
Yeah.
But you could also use a mock for one of the components if that's not what you're testing.
If someone would implement a mock, or if we had a use case for that, you could
just-
use whatever you want. But in the end, you have a component that has the exact HTTP interface.
It's like if you want to fake a bad behavior from pilot, then you could actually
you could implement this
nothing
interface.
the framework doesn't prevent you from doing that.
As long as I think the main requirement from what I'm saying is that whatever mock you have will behave at HTTP level, like mixer mock, for example.
Like if you implement the API.
You implement the protocol, and then it's just like a mixer, just implemented differently.
Yeah, so this is kind of the next level of details kind of thing. I can get a handle to mixer, running mixer, and I can get a source and port. Now I can do I can try to add like a mock here myself, saying that, okay, this is like a mock pilot making a call to, or mock proxy making a call to mixer, for example, right? So there's ways to extend the framework in that way, right? But the core of the framework is about actually being able to create an environment using the actual components. So
Okay.
if we can pull that one off, if we can actually say, look, it is very easy it's that simple to create an environment where we are using all the real components, and then based on that, if you write like scenario tests, then I think that's a great place to be in, and you don't need to deal with mocks. It's like you are running all the actual components.
I would avoid the word mock in the document in the discussion, because we are doing really integration testing. I mean, this is not what most people believe a mock is. We are not getting a mixer that kind of implements the interfaces. It's not a fake. It's a fake, not a mock. Yeah, if you want to be strict, but
Yeah, I agree. Mock is really neat.
so you get a pointer to a pilot implementation, which may or may not be the real pilot.
Yeah, so last time we talked about 70% and 30%. So now if I understand correctly, the 30% is definitely end-to-end testing real environment. The 70%, the test framework Strawman you're proposing, I assume that's the 70%. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the expectation is we should be able to get, based on the work Nathan is doing right now with the cluster stuff, I think you should be able to get 70% of at least pilot tests to work in this mode.
I would think that this test framework can be used for 100% of the tests, but not all tests will actually work. I mean, 30% of tests may not actually work on all environments. So because since the test framework allows you to write a test that would run against a pilot running wherever, the only difference will be that you need to skip some tests if the tests depend on, let's say, behavior of JKE, or depend on some local behavior. So based on how you annotate the test, you can skip some of the percentage of the test environments.
That's the intent with the requires part, right? So I think that's perfectly reasonable. And if you have something like this, you can have a policy that says, just skip those tests, or we can error out, or give additional information.
Yeah. So if a test needs to run on GKE, for example, right? Can it be part of the requirement as well, so that it actually hook up with a GKE environment?
No. I think what that means that the test will be skipped if you are not running in JKE environment.
So if you're not, but if
you are, it will run.
So the test can be written such that it requires GKE, and then you can actually run it using GKE, right?
Well,
Yeah, like you can annotate your test to say this
Right.
test has to be having this particular support.
I think you would do
Like
it-
book info, maybe another example too.
So
Right.
you
So
would
the
do that
annotation mechanism is kind of like this test requirement mechanism, right?
it's not going to start JKE. It's not going to create a project. I mean, it means, I think it means that if you are not running in JKE, this test will be skipped.
But then if you want to run all GKE, you set up your GKE cluster and run GKE suites.
And as the test will know it's in JKE, and then it will not skip.
Yeah.
That's very reasonable.
Yeah, think of these as primitives that we can supply through the test authoring experience, right? You are tagging your test as, okay, this is a GKE test. This requires GKE, right? And then at the framework level, then we can come up with strategies. For example, if we are running locally, we can just say, look, this is an error. Like, you try to run a GKE test, but you didn't supply me GKE configuration, so I'm going to error out. Or in the CI case, you can just say, oh, like, I know we actually did the right thing in segregating the tests, maybe running them in parallel. So we are just going to skip them, for example, right? So we can come up with different behaviors based on environment as well.
Yeah. I think I understand why Andy is confused, and I'm confused as well. It's probably a naming issues here that requires kind of in the first example, it means that the framework will start pilot.
Mm-hmm.
But in the second example, obviously, the test cannot start JK.
So it cannot. So the required
So it's more like
of preconditions, right? So the test framework can either make those preconditions true, if it can, and it can be done to varying degrees of success. Like, for example, if you give me a kube configuration and say, this is my test setup, do what you will, we can go and just redeploy Istio there, like, just pave it over, right? So if you give me the permission to do that, for example, I can go ahead and do that in the framework. But what I'm trying to point out is, like, there's a dial that is actually controllable at both our like implementation choices level, right? We haven't done some implementation choices yet, and also that dial is dialable at the usage level, right? Depending on where you're running, which command line flags that you specify.
Yeah. Also, I think the feedback was that this required is somewhat ambiguous in that sense, right? Like, in one case, you try to make the precondition happen, and in the other case, if the precondition is invalid, we just either fail or skip, right? So the two meaning.
I think it should be a label. I mean, the second one should be a label. I mean, it should be, label requires JK or label JK. So then you can skip if the label is not set.
Okay.
Because otherwise it's always confusing. I mean, requires, does require means that it really requires, or requires means say skip it if you are not there.
Okay.
And another question, do you know if we're going to use open tracing on all the framework? Like, have you thought about doing something like this?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
So, like, to do some kind of tracing. So I think Istio supports open tracing right now. And I think, like, from the debuggability point of view, it would be good, like, if we modify, let's say, book info, all those components that we use to actually use tracing, and then the framework, when you create a test, also does that, then, like, you run your test, it fails, you get all, you upload the tracing with your test failure, and then you can just look at this without needing to rerun the test and just understand, what went wrong. And
Yeah, I think that's really good. And in the past, in fact, we actually had a couple of Istio builds that tracing is like totally broken. So it would be nice if the framework could actually provide an easy way for us to test like Jaeger or Zipkin. I think we're looking at having Jaeger being default for distribute tracing in Istio. And also, like Seb was saying, to actually drill down to a particular microservice application to figure out what's going on.
So if I mean, that's probably not the intent of this framework, but if it's easy to enable it, then I think we can work on that.
So to go one step further, I mean, it would be wonderful is the test environments where we run would have Jagger and Prometheus enabled, so we can get metrics.
Yeah, like you're talking about book info. And
no, I'm talking all tests. I mean, in all tests, including the local tests on Circle CI, we can start a Jagger and Prometheus because they are not very heavy. And they will be very useful for debugging and this kind of stuff. The only problem is Zipkin is so heavy that it cannot really run on a single node locally.
But Jagger can?
Jagger can, yes, very light. So if we switch to Jagger and Prometheus started in the local environment, we could get all this debugging and maybe integrate it with the bug report tools that we have now.
Yeah, I think I'm going to work with Charles on how to get that, and obviously us, because on the sweat team is probably going to look into that, because that's that will definitely improve contributors' productivity, right? So.
Well, and replacing Zipkin with Jagger, finally, it's going to improve test reliability in general. Failing in
Did we switch to Jaeger in the Helm charts already in 0.8?
Now my PR is kind of, there are two PRs that are, both of them have issues.
Okay.
But this is very cool. This is a really great job. This is awesome.
Yeah, looks very useful.
My primary concern is if it's another framework, then and in 3 months we'll create another one.
No, but this one, as compared to the other one, this one was really thought, and it was like with some.
That's what we said on the previous 3.
No, and I think the first end-to-end framework was really done in a week just to get testing going, and so.
Yeah, the key is to get it, implemented in testing and used everywhere, and then it will stay. I mean, it's.
Yeah, but that's but now we have actually a team supporting this, which we didn't have.
So when can we start using it?
Yesterday.
Can we put annotation, sprinkle annotation, just even if they're not implemented, and just put them there?
Say again.
What?
I mean, can we put annotation? I mean, can we start putting annotation in all new tests? I mean, if you see a new test being submitted, can you ask, hey, it must have this annotation? On new test, if someone is writing a test or modifying a test, we can require them to put the respective annotations and start using the new framework.
Yeah, I think doing it at the test level is not going to be easy because you need to opt into this framework, and all the frameworks that we have, I know, is kind of capturing the test main. So there's going to be a bit of friction there. Like, you cannot just say, oh, test requires and then start using it, right? So we need to capture the test main, for example. So
okay, so can we put test main in both pilot tests and mixer tests? It's not.
But to the high level problem, I think we can couple this with linter checks, so that when you are, for example, submitting an integration test, we can ensure that you are using some appropriate setup and things like that.
So just make sure we're on the same page. So this test framework, it's going to replace Istio/tests end-to-end framework. Is that correct?
Yes. So the desire is to have one single framework in our system. Yeah.
Okay.
So make test, make book info, make all the tests should use this framework, no? Not only make test.
Well, but today, if you look at
That's
pilot,
unit test, but integration and end-to-end.
Yeah, and local test.
yeah, because if you look at pilot today, the reason I was asking is like I can run from my IDE, I can run a bunch of tests. I think those are much lightweight unit tests, which is not going to be covered by this framework, right?
It will.
Yes. It should be mostly covered.
Okay. Well, but for the unit, some of the unit test work are lightweight enough. Why would I use your framework?
Well, so for your unit test, you definitely should be doing exactly what you are doing today, right? This is just for being able to run, do integration testing, right? So this is kind of an add-on model for doing integration tests in such a way that it aligns with Go test, right? So at the end of the day, when you go to your IDE, there should be 2 sets of tests, right? Unit tests, exactly like this. You can run it through your IDE. And then you can also go to the integration tests, which looks like Go tests as well, and you should be able to run them as well.
To take an example, XDS test, I mean, in V2 test in pilot, they are all run locally in Circle CI against in-process pilot. So they start a pilot in process, and they are run just like normal tests. I mean, they don't, and they could use the same framework. And they run from an IDE, they start a pilot and start envoy locally, running as processes. And they behave like a local test. It's not a unit test because obviously it's starting a real envoy, but they could use the same framework and their integration tests run locally.
So it's only when you run against a cluster that, I mean, you will be run the test from your IDE, but I mean, you won't be able to understand what's going on the cluster.
Yes,
because
depending on how you configure the framework, I mean, you specify, hey, I want to run locally, then it's going to start.
Yeah, if it's locally, then you can see, all the thing. But if it's remote, then it's harder.
It's probably also. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just trying to summarize. So unit testing, we continue to do what we are doing. For the integration test on the component level, we can move to the new framework, and end-to-end tests, we can also move to the new framework.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Next thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no worries. I was just going to say that even when you're writing just a plain, simple unit test, that I suspect that a lot of the nuts and bolts of our framework with respect to local testing in particular might come in handy. So for example, we might have a new way to just like, if you want a unit test pilot, for example, we might have a new clever way to just spin up a local pilot with defaults that are useful for testing locally. So, you know, you may get some goodies even if you don't want to absorb the whole framework.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, look forward to use this.
Yes, it's gonna be cool.
We just need to implement it.
Yeah, I guess earlier Costin's question was like how quick we can make people start using it.
We don't have a schedule yet. We are still I think at this point, somewhat transitioning from, or in the process of transitioning from being in the prototype mode to actually, okay, let's try to get things running end to end. And I think the main litmus test that we are running against is, okay, can we get some tests like from the existing set of test suites and then, you know, make them run? Like if we can actually accomplish that, then I think that would be the right time to talk more concretely about, like, you know, schedules and
Timeline, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, agreed. You probably want to convert some of the integration end-to-end before you engage other people to create the tests based on the new framework.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, if not, anyone has anything else that wants to be discussed? No? Okay, then I think that's it for today. See you guys next time.
Thank you.
Yeah, see ya. Thanks.